The story begins in a sun-scorched land, a land cradled between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Greeks would later call it Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Here, under a vast and often unforgiving sky, human civilization first took root. It was a world of stark contrasts. Fertile green ribbons of life hugged the riverbanks, fed by the annual floods that brought rich silt down from the mountains. Beyond this lush corridor, the desert stretched out, a domain of dust and wind. This was the landscape that shaped its people, a place where survival depended on ingenuity, cooperation, and a deep respect for the powerful, often capricious, forces of nature. For thousands of years before our story truly begins, this land was home to the Sumerians. They were a remarkable people. They built the world's first cities, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish. Each city was a world unto itself, a sovereign state with its own king, its own army, and its own patron god or goddess. These city-states were jewels of mud brick, rising from the flat plains. At their heart stood the ziggurat, a colossal stepped pyramid, a man-made mountain reaching for the heavens. It was a bridge between the mortal world and the divine, a constant reminder of the god's power. Life was a tapestry woven from threads of farming, worship, and constant simmering conflict between rival cities. The Sumerians were pioneers. They invented writing, a revolutionary tool called cuneiform, made by pressing a reed stylus into wet clay. They developed complex systems of irrigation, turning the arid land into a breadbasket. They charted the stars, divided the hour into 60 minutes, and laid the foundations for law and mathematics. Yet for all their brilliance, they were politically fragmented. The kings of Uruk and Ur and Kish were locked in a perpetual struggle for dominance. They fought over water rights, trade routes, and prestige. This constant warfare, this inability to unite, created a power vacuum. It was a world ripe for change, waiting for a single powerful vision to bind it together. This was the world into which a new force was about to erupt. Into this patchwork of warring cities, a new people, the Akkadians, had been migrating for centuries. They were Semitic speakers, their language and culture distinct from the Sumerians. They settled in the northern parts of Mesopotamia, absorbing Sumerian technology and culture while retaining their own identity. They were a people on the periphery, watching and learning from the great cities to the south. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that was needed was a leader, someone with the ambition and the ruthlessness to seize the moment and reshape this ancient world forever. History is often shaped by individuals who seem to appear from nowhere, men and women of destiny whose origins are shrouded in myth. Sargon of Akkad is one such figure. His story is not that of a prince born to rule, but of an outsider, a man of humble beginnings who clawed his way to the pinnacle of power. The legends that surround his birth are potent and revealing. They tell of a baby boy, born in secret to a high priestess. To save him, his mother placed him in a reed basket, sealed it with bitumen, and set it adrift on the Euphrates River. This story, echoing the later tale of Moses, was a powerful piece of political propaganda, suggesting a man chosen by the gods, saved by fate for a greater purpose. The basket, so the legend goes, floated downstream until it was discovered by a man named Akki, a humble gardener. Akki was drawing water for his plants when he saw the small vessel. He rescued the infant, named him Sargon, and raised him as his own son. Sargon grew up far from the corridors of power, learning the rhythms of the land, tending to the date palms and irrigation channels. This portrayal of a common man, a man of the earth, would have resonated deeply with the ordinary people of Mesopotamia. It was a story that set him apart from the established dynasties of the Sumerian city-states, presenting him as a man of the people, not of the privileged elite. His journey from the garden to the palace began when he found favor with Ur-Zababa, the king of the powerful city-state of Kish. Sargon became the king's cupbearer. This was no menial role. The cupbearer was a trusted official, a confidant who was always by the king's side, privy to the innermost secrets of the court. It was a position of immense influence and potential danger. It was here, in the heart of Sumerian power, that Sargon learned the arts of politics, diplomacy, and warfare. He watched the intricate dance of power, the betrayals and the alliances. He saw the strengths, and more importantly, the weaknesses of the Sumerian system. The turning point came when Baba, according to the legends, grew fearful of Sargon. Perhaps he saw the ambition burning in his cupbearer's eyes, or perhaps he was spooked by a dream. He tried to have Sargon killed, but Sargon survived. This act of betrayal, whether real or a later invention, provided the justification for what came next. Sargon, the loyal servant, was transformed into a rebel. He was no longer just a gardener's son or a king's cupbearer. He was a man with a grievance, a man who believed he had a greater destiny. He gathered followers, soldiers who were drawn to his charisma and his promise of a new order, and prepared to challenge the very foundations of the world he knew. Sargon's rise was not a single swift coup. It was a methodical and brutal campaign that forever altered the political map of Mesopotamia. His first major adversary was Lugal-Zagassi of Uruk, the most powerful Sumerian king of his time. Lugal-Zagassi had himself already united much of Sumer, creating a confederation of city-states under his rule. He was the established power, the great king. Sargon, the upstart from the north, marched his army south to challenge him. The clash was monumental. It was a battle not just between two men, but between two worlds. The old Sumerian order versus Sargon's new centralizing vision. The decisive battle was fought near Uruk. Sargon's victory was absolute and ruthless. He captured Lugal-Zagassi, and in a gesture of ultimate humiliation, he put a dog collar around the defeated king's neck and paraded him through the gate of the great god Enlil in the holy city of Nippur. This was more than just punishment. It was a powerful symbolic act. Sargon was demonstrating to all of Mesopotamia that the old gods and the old kings had been defeated. A new power had arrived, a power that did not play by the old rules. He was declaring that he, Sargon, was now the favored of the gods, the true king of the land. With Lugal-Zagassi broken, Sargon embarked on a sweeping campaign to subdue the rest of the Sumerian city-states. He moved from city to city, Lagash, Umma. His strategy was relentless. After each conquest, he systematically dismantled the city's defensive walls. This was a stroke of genius. Walls were the ultimate symbol of a city's independence and its primary means of defense. By tearing them down, Sargon was physically and psychologically breaking their autonomy. They could no longer retreat behind their fortifications and defy him. They were now exposed, dependent on his protection and subject to his will. It was a clear message. There would be no more independent cities, only a single unified land. The campaign was long and bloody. Uprisings were common, and Sargon had to repeatedly march his armies to crush rebellions. But with each victory, his authority grew stronger. He claimed to have fought 34 battles and subjugated 50 rulers. He washed his weapons in the sea, a poetic way of saying he had conquered all the land from the northern plains down to the Persian Gulf. For the first time in history, the entire Mesopotamian plain, from the Akkadian north to the Sumerian south, was united under a single ruler. The age of warring city-states was over. The age of empire had begun. Sargon was no longer just Sargon of Kish. He was Sargon, king of Akkad, king of the universe. Every great empire needs a great capital, a center of power that reflects its glory and ambition. Sargon knew this. He did not choose to rule from an existing Sumerian city like Kish or Uruk. To do so would be to associate his new regime with the old, fragmented order he had fought so hard to destroy. Instead, he founded his own capital, Akkad. The city's very existence was a statement. It was a new creation, a symbol of his new era. It was built to be the political, economic, and cultural heart of his empire, a place loyal only to him and the dynasty he intended to establish. The precise location of Akkad remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. We know from countless texts that it was a magnificent city, but its ruins have never been definitively identified. It was likely situated on the Euphrates River, somewhere near modern-day Baghdad. Its location was strategically brilliant, positioned at the confluence of the Akkadian north and the Sumerian south. From here, Sargon and his successors could control the major trade routes, both by river and by land, that crisscrossed Mesopotamia. Akkad was not just a symbol of unity. It was the practical linchpin holding the empire together. a central hub from which armies could be dispatched and tribute collected. Akkad was built to impress. Texts describe a city of temples, palaces, and bustling harbors. It was a cosmopolitan metropolis, drawing in people from every corner of the vast empire. Sumerians, Akkadians, Elamites, and Amorites walked its streets. They brought their goods, their skills, and their gods, creating a vibrant multicultural society. The city was the administrative nerve center of the empire. Here, a new class of bureaucrats, loyal to the king, managed the complex logistics of a state that stretched for hundreds of miles. They standardized weights and measures, organized a postal system, and oversaw the collection of taxes from conquered territories. The city of Akkad became more than just a place on a map. It became a legend. For the next 2,000 years, long after its walls had crumbled to dust, Mesopotamian kings would evoke its name. They called themselves King of Sumer and Akkad to link their own rule to the glory of Sargon's empire. Akkad represented a golden age of unity and strength, a time when Mesopotamia was the undisputed center of the world. The lost city became a powerful myth, a Mesopotamian Camelot, a testament to the monumental achievement of Sargon, who built not just an empire of conquest, but a capital city that would echo through eternity. The unification of Mesopotamia under Akkadian rule, really unleashed a torrent of cultural and artistic innovation. With the end of internal warfare, resources that had once been poured into armies and fortifications were now, directed towards art, architecture, and administration. Sargon and his successors, they were not just military conquerors. They were patrons of a new, dynamic culture that blended Sumerian traditions with a distinct Akkadian spirit. This period saw the creation of a new imperial art style, one that broke from the static, formal conventions of the Sumerian city-states and embraced a new level of naturalism and vitality. One of the most significant achievements was in the realm of writing and language. While the Akkadians adopted the Sumerian cuneiform script, they adapted it to write their own Semitic language, Akkadian. This language became the lingua franca of the empire, the official tongue of administration, law, and diplomacy. For the first time, a single language was used to govern a vast multi-ethnic territory. This linguistic unity was a powerful tool for centralization, allowing for clear communication from the capital in Akkad to the furthest provincial governor. Scribes trained in Akkadian cuneiform became an essential part of the imperial bureaucracy, honestly, the glue that held the state together. Akkadian art reflected the new political reality. The focus shifted from the anonymous pious figures of Sumerian art to the celebration of the king and his heroic deeds. Royal portraiture reached a new height of realism and power. The magnificent bronze head discovered at Nineveh, widely believed to be a portrait of Sargon or his grandson Naram-Sin, is a masterpiece of this era. It depicts a ruler with a commanding presence, intricate hairstyle, and a serene yet powerful expression. It is not just a symbol of kingship, it is the portrait of an individual, a confident and charismatic leader. This focus on the powerful living monarch was a hallmark of Akkadian imperial ideology. This cultural flowering also saw the development of the cylinder seal, a small, intricately carved stone cylinder that, when rolled onto wet clay, created a unique impression. Under the Akkadians, these seals became miniature works of art. Instead of the sedate banquet scenes common in Sumerian seals, Akkadian artisans carved dynamic scenes of mythology and combat. Gods battled each other, heroes wrestled with lions, and the king was shown triumphant. These seals were used to sign documents and secure property, but they were also powerful tools of propaganda, spreading the imagery of royal power and divine favor throughout the empire with every transaction. The Akkadian Empire was forged in war, and it was, really sustained by it. Sargon the Great was not content merely to unite the cities of Mesopotamia. His ambition was boundless. He looked beyond the Fertile Crescent to the lands of silver, cedar, and stone. His reign, and those of his successors, was a near-constant series of military campaigns aimed at securing trade routes and conquering new territories to feed the voracious appetite of the imperial center. The Akkadian army was the most advanced of its day, a professional fighting force that could be deployed rapidly across vast distances to secure the frontiers and crush any opposition. Sargon pushed his armies east into Elam, in what is now Iran, and west into Syria and Anatolia, or modern Turkey. These were not just raids for plunder, they were strategic campaigns to control valuable resources. The mountains of Anatolia were rich in silver and copper, while the forests of Lebanon provided the precious cedar wood needed for building temples and palaces. Wood that was just, totally absent in the river plains of Mesopotamia. Akkadian victory steles, carved stone monuments celebrating military triumphs, have been found as far away as Turkey. These markers were territorial claims, declarations in stone that these lands now belonged to the king of Akkad. The empire reached its zenith under Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, who ruled for over 50 years. Naram-Sin was an even more ambitious conqueror than his grandfather. He campaigned relentlessly in the Zagros Mountains against the Lulubi people, and pushed the empire's boundaries further than ever before. He was the first Mesopotamian king to deify himself, to declare himself a living god, taking the title God of Akkad. This was a radical departure from tradition, where kings were seen as mere servants of the gods. The famous victory stele of Naram-Sin captures this perfectly. It shows a triumphant, godlike king, larger than all other men, ascending a mountain over the bodies of his defeated enemies. This constant expansion, however, came at a cost. Governing such a vast and diverse territory was a monumental challenge. The empire was a mosaic of different peoples, cultures, and languages, many of whom resented Akkadian rule. Rebellions were a constant threat, requiring the Akkadian kings to be perpetually on the march, putting down one uprising after another. The Great Revolt against Naram-Sin saw a massive coalition of cities from both the north and south rise up against him. Though he eventually crushed the rebellion, it was a sign of the deep-seated resistance to Akkadian domination and a foreshadowing of the fragility that lay beneath the empire's powerful exterior. For the vast majority of people living under Akkadian rule, life was tied to the land and the seasons, much as it had been for centuries. They were farmers, living in small villages of mud brick houses clustered around the canals and fields. Their world was one of hard physical labor, governed by the rhythm of the agricultural cycle, the spring planting of barley and wheat, the summer tending of date palm orchards, and the autumn harvest. The empire brought stability and, in some cases, improved infrastructure, with the state organizing the maintenance of the vast irrigation networks that were the lifeblood of the land. This ensured a more reliable food supply, the foundation upon which the entire imperial structure rested. In the burgeoning cities like Akkad, Ur, and Nippur, a more complex society existed. Beyond the royal court and the priesthood, there was a growing class of merchants, artisans, and scribes. The unification of the region and the security of trade routes created unprecedented economic opportunities. Merchants organized long-distance caravans, trading Mesopotamian grain and textiles for metal, stone, and timber from abroad. Artisans, potters, weavers, and metalworkers found their skills in high demand, producing goods for both local consumption and export. Life in the city was noisy, crowded, and vibrant, a stark contrast to the quieter pace of the countryside. The family was the core unit of Akkadian society. Marriages were typically arranged, formalized by a contract inscribed on a clay tablet. Society was patriarchal, with the father holding authority over his household, but women possessed more rights than in many later ancient cultures. They could own property, run businesses, and act as witnesses in legal cases. Children were expected to learn the family trade and to care for their parents in old age. Religion permeated every aspect of daily life. People made regular offerings to the gods at local shrines, seeking protection, good health, and a plentiful harvest. They wore amulets to ward off evil spirits and consulted diviners to understand the will of the gods. Despite the grandeur of the empire, life for the common person was often precarious. Drought and floods could ruin crops and lead to famine. Disease was a constant threat, and while the empire brought an end to the wars between city-states, it demanded its own price. Farmers paid taxes to the state in the form of a portion of their harvest, a burden that could be heavy. Their sons could be conscripted into the army to fight in distant lands from which they might never return. For many, the Akkadian Empire was a remote and powerful entity, a source of both security and oppression, whose decrees and demands shaped the fundamental realities of their daily existence. No empire lasts forever. The Akkadian Empire, for all its power and glory, proved to be remarkably short-lived, collapsing after little more than a century. Its fall was not due to a single cause, but a convergence of pressures, both internal and external, that overwhelmed its foundations. One of the primary factors was the empire's own success. The sheer size of the territory it controlled made it incredibly difficult to govern. Constant rebellions by subjugated peoples drained the treasury and stretched the army thin. The Akkadian kings were forced into a cycle of endless campaigning simply to hold their empire together, a strategy that was ultimately unsustainable. A powerful narrative from later Mesopotamian tradition, known as the Curse of Akkad, offers a poetic, religious explanation for the empire's downfall. The story blames the collapse on the hubris of King Naram-Sin. It tells how, in a fit of rage after the gods denied him permission to rebuild a temple, Naram-Sin sacked the holy city of Nippur, the sacred sanctuary of the god Enlil. This act of sacrilege, the tale goes, enraged Enlil, who in turn unleashed the Gutians, a fierce people from the Zagros Mountains, to punish Akkad. This story, while mythological, likely reflects a historical reality: the growing resentment of the traditional Sumerian religious establishment towards the Akkadian kings and their self-deification. Beyond internal rebellion and religious strife, there is compelling evidence that the empire was struck by a severe environmental crisis. Paleoclimatological studies of the region suggest that around 2200 BCE, a prolonged and catastrophic drought struck the Near East. This abrupt climate change would have led to widespread crop failures and famine. The fertile plains of northern Mesopotamia, the breadbasket of the empire, would have turned to dust. This would have caused mass starvation and social unrest, and likely triggered the southward migration of desperate peoples, placing unbearable strain on the already stressed resources of the southern cities. An empire built on agricultural surplus could not survive its disappearance. The final blow came from external invaders. Weakened by internal revolts and ecological disaster, the empire became vulnerable to attack. The Gutians, the so-called barbarians from the mountains described in the Curse of Akkad, swept down into the Mesopotamian plains. They were not a sophisticated army bent on conquest and administration, but raiders who disrupted trade, sacked cities, and shattered the centralized control of the Akkadian state. The empire disintegrated, breaking apart into the patchwork of independent city-states it had been before Sargon's conquests. The great city of Akkad itself was destroyed and abandoned, its location lost to history, its golden age brought to an abrupt and violent end. Though the Akkadian Empire was gone, its ghost haunted Mesopotamia for the next 2 millennia. It had fundamentally and honestly irrevocably changed the course of history. The most profound legacy was the very idea of empire itself. Sargon had created a new political model. He proved that it was possible to unite the disparate peoples of the Near East under a single, centralized authority. This concept of a multi-ethnic universal state became the blueprint for all subsequent empires in the region: the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and even the Persians. They all saw themselves as the heirs of Sargon, adopting his titles and aspiring to replicate his grand achievement. The Akkadian language also had a lasting impact. It outlived the empire that created it by centuries, becoming the dominant language of diplomacy, literature, and science throughout the ancient Near East. Great works of later Mesopotamian literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, were written in Akkadian. It became the language of international correspondence, used in the courts of the Hittites in Anatolia and the pharaohs in Egypt. In this way, the culture of Akkad continued to spread and influence civilizations long after its armies had vanished and its capital had crumbled into dust. The Akkadian adaptation of cuneiform script ensured its use for another 1,500 years. The art and ideology of the Akkadian period also left an indelible mark. The focus on the strong, heroic king, the celebration of military victory, and the concept of a divinely sanctioned monarch became central tenets of Mesopotamian kingship. The realistic portraiture and dynamic narrative style pioneered by Akkadian artisans influenced the art of Babylon and Assyria. The fearsome Assyrian kings, with their grand reliefs depicting brutal conquests and lion hunts, were the direct artistic descendants of Sargon and Naram-Sin. The idea of the king as a conqueror, a shepherd to his people, and a favorite of the gods was an Akkadian invention that echoed through the ages. Ultimately, the story of the Akkadian Empire is a powerful lesson in both the creative and destructive forces of history. It is the story of how a single individual's ambition can reshape the world, forging unity from chaos. It is a testament to the power of ideas, of a unified state, a common language, and an imperial art style. But it is also a cautionary tale about the fragility of power, the dangers of overreach, and the potent forces of rebellion, climate, and faith that can bring even the mightiest empires to their knees. Sargon's creation was the world's first empire, and its spectacular rise and dramatic fall created a legend that would inspire and warn kings for thousands of years to come.